Hello, I'm Helgast. Being someone who enjoys video games, I can safely say I know what makes a good video game. It's repetition. You know, games that make little changes but charge full price. Most people would point to your yearly sports games, but I would also point to your yearly Call of Duties. I would argue is the sports games of shooters, as we get one every year. It takes about 2 games before we get any sort of changes in the game mechanics. Instead, each yearly release gives us a map rotation, which is the game's version of a team roster change. But in those 2 years, one game will change the COD formula. This all started in 2007 when Modern Warfare kicked it all off with its fast gameplay and addictive nature of the game. Then Black Ops 2 brought us the PIC-13 system. Next was Advanced Warfare with the XO movement. Then Call of Duty World War II for removing the X movement system. Now we have Modern Warfare 2019 with its gunsmith mechanic that the rest of the Call of Duties are trying to figure out how to evolve this mechanic. We also have our installments of Assassin's Creed and Far Cry games where they change the map and a handful of mechanics. It's always fascinating to watch the games that players bitch about the company not doing anything new or taking risks, then watching the same people praise a game that's literally doing the same thing. But it's different because it's a company I like, therefore it's a masterpiece. It's just a fascinating element of observing any sort of industry, really. With that bit out of the way, let's talk about Elden Ring, also known as Dark Souls 4. The game that has just brought the Souls formula in a bigger open world format. A game that I keep seeing everyone scream is a flawless masterpiece. Even though compared to the other Souls game, it has some of the biggest design flaws in the series in my opinion. Before we start talking about the problems, I want to touch on why I'm reviewing this game about 7 months after its launch. Reviewing any game on day 1 is like playing Russian roulette on how long your video will be relevant, because games need constant updates these days, so you don't know how long before your video becomes irrelevant. For example, reviews for Ubisoft's For Honor in year 1 differ from our current ones, as the game launched with peer-to-peer connection in a competitive 4v4 fighting game. It had a small number of characters in its launch, plus its own technical issues all games these days have at launch. Now the game is on either year 6 or 7 and it's received big changes like its own dedicated servers and a nice number of characters. Plus a combat rework has made any earlier reviews to be outdated due to the content that was added. So waiting for a bit for a review can allow for the game to be in a far better place technically. Plus it allows me more time to form my thoughts. So a factor that will not be included in my scoring is the bugs, since most of them will probably be fixed by the time I get this review out. Besides, the worst that Elden Ring gets for PS4 is some cases where the frame rate dies dramatically in some areas and some fights have them in single digits. But other than that, and the one freak incident when my game froze during co-op and I lost my character of around 100 hours on them, thankfully I had a backup, but from my understanding, bugs like that and the freezing have been heavily worked on, and they're not really much of a problem anymore. The last thing I need to say before people have a heart attack is that Elden Ring isn't a bad game, far from it, it's still a good game. But it's no gaming masterpiece that plenty of people want to keep saying it is. Since this is a Souls game, I know that some people will say that these are hard games and aren't for casuals like me. While it feels unnecessary to say, but I have played and beaten all the Soulsborne games, except for Sekiro, as I didn't gel with the game's combat, but that's just a personal thing and not the game's fault. In case people want to know, here's my list from least liked to favorite Soulsborne game, because it might give some more insights on what I like in a Souls game. Starting with my least favorite, we have Dark Souls 2, Scholars of the First Sin, Elden Ring, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, and finally my old-time favorite, Bloodborne. With that out of the way, let's get this review started. Open world games have been big in the gaming genre for the past decade or so. With being such a moneymaker for the industry, there's been an oversaturation of these games. So when finding out that Elden Ring was hopping onto the open world bandwagon, I wasn't too thrilled. Since these games like to copy each other hard, lately we've been seeing games wanting to change and make things more interesting for the players. With that, I decided to have an open mind on the game because you never know what company could break the mold. For the most part, FromSoft did things differently than your traditional open world formula, so don't expect to be liberating any outposts or climbing any towers, or even traditional side quests, as FromSoft gave us an open world with nothing to do except explore it. The amount of freedom given is quite refreshing, since you can go anywhere on the map except for about 2 places that need story progression. While at first this is a welcome change compared to other games, it quickly starts to have a lot of smaller problems. One of the biggest problems is this style really hurts playability with specific builds, because if you're a standard magic or weapon user, the game's happy to give you everything you want with little additional effort from the player. But if you're a faith build, or in Elden Ring terms, an incantation build, welcome to a really shitty scavenger hunt that you involuntarily signed up for. If you're going to play your first playthrough and don't want spoilers, don't be a faith or incantation build, because you start to believe that the game hates you compared to magic users. Since the game will rain down spells and staffs on you with minimum effort, while those incantation and seals, the items used to cast incantations, be prepared to look up a guide to find them due to their terrible placements. For example, there's an incantation around here. If you haven't played this, you might be thinking, on top of the hill in that shack. Because it's a building that probably has something in it, but no, it's not there. It's on the fucking night that, depending on where you have gone, you could have seen plenty of them and decided to ignore it. Then we have this beetle here by a castle with giant shooting arrows. Most of the fucking beetles, in my experience, give spells or arts of war. Since this guy kept teleporting, I just ignored him, expecting it to be another spell. But no, this one has the poison mist incantation for some fucking reason. Why is it fucking here? So yeah, my first experience was sort of ruined with this madman logic to where incantations are located. Now don't worry, I still have one more example that to this day still irks me of its location. My friends and I were doing a co-op run, which has its problems, but we'll get to that. I decided to do an incantation and dragon spells because it sounded cool. So we went around 60 to 80-ish hours in the game. We have a small number of seals and haven't found a dragon seal, so I thought there just wasn't one of them. Since dragon spells with random seals tend to be strong on their own, plus in all the areas with dragons and the dragon churches didn't have one, so I was convinced it didn't exist. But since my other friend was doing an incantation build, we noticed we barely had any incantations over the spells we had, so we went onto the wiki to check some locations, where I found that there was a dragon seal, and thought, well damn, with the world being so big, I could have just easily have gone past it. So the dragon seal is in the most logical of places, right at the start of the game, after the first mandatory boss, where you see that this poison-filled optional area before the elevator to the open world. Why is it there? Like, come on, there's so many other places where it could have been. Just off the top of my head, it could have been at either the dragon churches, the practically empty castle near the big screaming dragon, or even by the sleeping dragon guarding a key, since there is little to indicate a dragon seal would be at the start, and at the time, the side caves and dungeons were giving shit souls, and I had no intention of going there until I found out it was there. Let's move on and talk about some of the other new mechanics to aid us in the open world. Unlike other Souls games, we have the ability to fast travel almost anywhere. All you need to do is discover a grace, which is Elden Ring's bonfire, then you can open your map, pick a grace, and bam, you're fast traveling. It's a good feature. Now I shouldn't be surprised that the game handles fast travel like this, but with the game taking so many elements from Dark Souls, I kind of expected it to be the old system of fast travel, where we had to sit at the bonfire to fast travel around bonfires. The only problem is that the system doesn't work in caves. You can fast travel in them, but you can't fast travel out of them. At first it seems like an inconvenience for a while, however I think the system works like this due to a bug that speedrunners have found in some caves, where loading into them and then fast traveling out can allow you to skip massive portions of the game. So I'm assuming FromSoft was having problems with the system in caves, so for the sake of time, they made the system as is so that they can ship the game without too many game-breaking bugs. The next improvement is the ability to put down markers on the map. This allows you to remind yourself of some important things like chests, NPCs, or ruins to share with your friends. This would seem to be something I shouldn't be mentioning, but the feature used to be far more important at launch, as this would be many players' main method of marking where NPCs are located, but that functionality has been pretty much lost now, due to a patch where NPCs are now just shown on the map if they're near graces, which makes this a feature with little importance. Kinda wish that update never happened, since this is one of the open world games where I use the feature like this. It also helps reinforce the idea that you're exploring and filling out this map with your own markers, versus now where the map is just filled with graces and now one waypoint that I don't remember where I placed it. Can't fucking find it. Moving on, let's talk about another aspect that the game spared no expense on. All these explorable caves throughout the world. Another cool and exciting element at the start of the game, but the caves quickly become repetitive, because all but 3, possibly 5 caves that I know of have some sort of interesting gimmick or puzzle attached to them. A majority of them follow the same pattern. Go into the cave, find a lever, then kill the boss. Most, if not all, of the bosses in these caves are not handcrafted bosses. Instead, most of the time, it's either a basic enemy with boss health or a reused boss. A small number of the bosses are exclusive to the caves. With the abundance of caves, finding a new one is an exciting one. Since the level design for most of them is either a straight line or you walk in a small circle, it doesn't have the interest or complexity of other areas in the game. Plus the rewards for the caves tend to be little. The best thing you would get are these amulets, which are just rings from Dark Souls. Even then, with their repetitive nature, you'll probably end up looking up where the items that you need for your build are located anywhere. It sucks because a small number of unique bosses are rather neat in their design. They really become less special when they repeat that boss. For example, Stone Cat Boss is neat, but there's 2 variations of them, and because they either ran out of time or for some other reason, they just throw 2 of them at you in a fight. It makes me wish the caves were handled entirely different. I kinda wish there were fewer of them, but they were designed like a Legend of Zelda dungeon. Doing this would cause there to be less caves since there would be more dev time thrown at them. But they would be more memorable and have something to do than more of the base game. In its current form, it just made me ignore caves except for the few that let me buy upgrade materials. With the amount of freedom you have without dumb restrictions is nice, it really starts to feel aimless after Godric. Since exploring the open world quickly starts to not be rewarding. That feeling hit the hardest during my incantation playthrough, but also hit when using other builds. The world itself feels lifeless most of the time because there just isn't enough dynamic elements to make the open world interesting. While I have my complaints about Red Dead 2, GTA, and other open world games, there are plenty of things happening on the side to keep me interesting and sell the illusion that the world's alive. Like in Far Cry, stumbling across a random firefight that's happening makes it feel like there is a bigger battle or war going on. In Red Dead Redemption 2, when wandering around just to get an NPC to cry for help when they're being kidnapped. Even something like Dying Light 2, where you have the choice of going into dark zones like stores during the day, where you're probably gonna fight a shit ton of zombies to get the rewards, or go at night, where there are fewer zombies, but you're always on a timer. That's something Elden Ring is missing, as its only sort of dynamic element are some random open world bosses that are limited on their spawning based on if the world is day or if it's nighttime. I wish there were side quests, like basic side quests and not the weird ones we have now. The main NPC's questline and their crypticness just made it so I would look up what I had to do, getting rid of the discovery and finding things out like the game wants me to do. Cryptic quests work in Dark Souls because you would most of the time be forced to go back to some areas, where the NPCs would just be there, or they'd be slightly off the beaten path. It gets to a point where I wish the game dropped the whole open world part, since it seems to not have enough to keep me interested in exploring. At one point, I just focused on beating the game, ignoring all extra exploring sections. At the start of my first playthrough, it felt refreshing, and then it kept going. Plus, if the game had some more traditional things like outposts or some traditional side quest, it can fix the placement of items problem. For example, in this pyromancy camp, having a quest to clear it would lead me to see the place sooner. Plus, even the pyromancy book there as optional loot you can find in a chest will increase the chance of players finding them. Something basic like that could make its players have a reason to explore certain areas. It also makes the placement of items don't need to follow the madman logic, but maybe that is something that they could bring for the sequel that's most likely being worked on as we speak. Well, that covers most of the open world elements. Let's talk about the game's most messy and terrible function, the online co-op experience. The way that the Souls games handle co-op is one of its standout features, with the game being an RPG, as all the games can be played entirely in single player, or they can almost be fully co-opted. Just having co-op in the full game is a feat on its own, since full-blown RPGs tend to stick in the single player category. If these games didn't have co-op, I don't think I could have gotten as many friends into this franchise. It's nice to have the option, however, to actually do co-op, it's quite clunky. For the initiative, these games need to have 2, sometimes 3 items in order to actually do the co-op, as you need to obtain an item to actually host the game, then an item for your friends to be summoned. Having the items, then the host needs to use the online item, then whoever you're trying to summon has to put down a sign, the host then waits for the sign to appear, then they select it, and you're summoned. Yeah, it's a fucking clunky system that throughout the games has been slowly getting some quality of life changes, like adding passwords so that you can instantly match with certain people with the password, or increasing the drop rates in the enemies that drop the co-op items, making them easier to come across. Summoning a co-op partner has its downsides as it opens up your world to being invaded by a random player for some forced PvP. It's a feature I don't like because I don't think the Dark Souls combat works well in PvP, but that's just my opinion. I wish there was an option to turn off the invaders, as this feature has also made a chunk of my friends never want to play these games, because nothing is more fun than to start Dark Souls and get invaded by a man with endgame gear to kill new players, for a reason that I don't and I won't understand. But that's the main downside to it, because the only other thing is that all the enemies are scaled to the number of players in the game. Since Elden Ring has a far bigger scope than other Souls games, it baffles me that FromSoft decided to use the exact same multiplayer system as Dark Souls. It has 2 quality of life features, one being that having the multiplayer item is incredibly easy to obtain, as the game has a crafting system, where one of the recipes happens to be the online item, and all it takes for you is to buy the crafting kit. Then pick up one of the most abundant flowers in the game, So the start of the co-op experience is grabbing a shitload of these flowers. The change to making the system extremely easy to access is a nice one, especially after hearing some of the interviews with the game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, who stated that he wanted more people to complete Elden Ring, since in all the other Souls games, the completion rate is relatively low. With this design direction in mind, I understand why you want to make the co-op experience one of the quickest and easiest the franchise has ever seen. With this direction in mind from the game's director, it starts to creep in plenty of problems following the Dark Souls systems. For starters, when you summon a friend, both you and your friend then have to live. Because if one friend dies, then he or she goes back to their world. If the host dies, then everyone goes back to their world. This system has always been inconvenient in the Souls games, but doesn't become too annoying due to the smaller linear levels. But in Elden Ring, it's a goddamn nightmare due to the open world, since the game still has the hoops just to get co-op to work, but if someone dies, then you have to stop everything, turn around to the last grace / bonfire to resummon your friend, since that's the easiest method. This leads to a lot of running back and forth, and it really kills the pacing of exploring if one person keeps dying. Especially since the first thing players are greeted with is their first world boss known as the Tree Sentinel. So let's discuss something that can break co-op in certain areas. To this day, I don't know if this is a bug or a design choice. So when the game launched, and this stayed for about 2 months if I recall correctly, killing the Tree Sentinel killed co-op in Limegrave, as it seems like the boss also used another design choice from Dark Souls, where if the player kills a boss, that area's co-op stops working. Now they have patched that out, but the Tree Sentinel in Atlas Plateau kills co-op if you defeat him. Now I haven't gone through and attempted to kill all the world bosses because there is a lot of uninteresting repeats, but if something changes or it turns out this is a bug, I will leave a pinned comment below. But finding out that the Tree Sentinel did this caused the co-op to be killed heavily between me and my friends, because what's the point of finding a neat boss with friends if we can't kill him? Which limited the already limiting co-op experience. What makes it hard to tell if it's a bug or a feature is this is exactly how it works in dungeons or caves. For example, Stormveil Castle. If you kill Godric, you can't keep exploring around with buddies. This is a shame because the castle has a lot of pathways, and the level design for most of the dungeons are high quality. However, the problem is that it's easy to accidentally run past things, or worse, immediately get to the boss. We're going to stay in Stormveil for a bit because I don't want to spoil too much. You can either go through the path the game is expecting, where it has you exploring the castle, or be stubborn donkeys like me and my friends, who took the challenge of the front gate, and after a little bit of running, it leads directly to the boss. You can miss a lot at this place. It also has the madman's logic, as there's an easy incantation book and seal to miss. There are 3 whole ass NPCs that you can miss. Depending on the chaos, you could have missed the obvious gold tree seed, and then there are the hidden ones below. This is neat, but if you kill Godric, then you lose all co-op access for some reason. What made this not much of a problem in the other Souls games is that the areas were designed most of the time to have an additional boss, or you'd end up running back there so that if you killed the boss there's another chance to find the items in co-op. Since they have you going back to some areas, it's a restriction that works well in another game but doesn't in this one. Now to some players, it's simple, don't fight the boss, which is easier said than done depending on playstyles. Because for me, having the choice of exploring another FromSoft castle versus fighting a new FromSoft boss that could have the potential of being my favorite in all the franchise, for me the choice is obvious. Fight the boss versus checking out another FromSoft castle. It feels like a dumb restriction that goes against the direction of getting more people to finish the game. Because if you thought you got everything, or worse, there is a useful item in a really annoying spot, you have to do it now with friends, or beat the boss, and then do it solo later. Or the worst fate, beating the boss, then finding out there's an item that you need in an annoying spot. Dealing with all those hurdles, we haven't even tackled the biggest downside of playing co-op. As the second your friends connect, or you get invaded, you lose access to your horse, which is the game's traversal option to make exploring the world easier and faster than on foot. Plus, you lose out on the jumping spring mechanic, which takes your horse and lets it go over massive obstacles. Taking the horse away can highlight how empty the world really is, and can leave you sprinting with nothing to do for a while. I can see some defending this, but this is the equivalent of taking the parkour elements out of Dying Light 1 or 2 because you want to play co-op. Or if you went to play GTA Online, and when someone joined your lobby, you lose access to all vehicles. It makes for such a disjointed co-op experience. Now I know that other people feel the same way because within the first few months, there was a mod that fixed all this on PC, where all players in the world can have their horse. When someone dies, they go to the nearest grace. It allows you to invite your friends, skipping the other elements of co-op. It makes the world feel more natural of other open world games versus the current one. In its current state, it just led to all the friends I've played with this game running off doing their own thing, and the only thing we ever co-opted was against the bosses. It feels like the multiplayer element was an afterthought for the devs, but I feel like the reality is it was to cut back on development elements by reusing the same elements as Dark Souls. With all the negatives that Elden Ring co-op has, let's talk about a positive one. As the second quality of life feature are these co-op totems. Touching it will make your sign appear around a radius of bosses. So long gone are the days of trying to find help on a boss that no one cares about. Now this feature will lose its usefulness as the game ages and fewer people are playing it, but it's a good addition regardless. With all the problems that come with co-op, there is one last quirk for Elden Ring. There's no cross co-op progression. I'm not quite sure if I have the right term, but everything you do in a friend's world is only for their world and not yours. I understand the system is like this due to the other co-op elements, but it can really make the game get repetitive fast. A lot of that comes from the game taking the worst element of Dark Souls 2, which is having a dumb number of bosses. Elden Ring has about 80-ish bosses, which depending on how many players you're playing with, can be really annoying. That you have to kill, then reconnect to do it 2 more times, assuming you beat the boss on your first time. I want some sort of middle ground with the normal system and some cross co-op progression. Like if you kill a world or cave boss, you and whoever you're playing with gets the item the boss would drop and the full number of souls. While mandatory bosses, everyone has to kill in their own world, because most of the open world and cave bosses are either basic enemies with boss health or a boss that's reused everywhere. In fact, I think I've talked enough about the co-op aspect of the game. Let's just dive into the bosses and the problems they have, shall we? Bosses in all the Soulsborne games are highlights of the series for me, as each game has some amazing bosses. I enjoy a good chunk of the fights, and to give an idea of the fights I like, I'm going to list the bosses I like, starting with Dark Souls, because I've only beaten Demon Souls once, so my memory of the bosses that I actually enjoyed are a bit blurry. Dark Souls, we have Gargoyles, Booba Spider-Girl, Artorias, Gwen, Doggo Sif, and Gwendolyn, or Guinevere. Fuck. Dark Souls 2 has Sir Alone, a 2-headed spooter, Smelter Demon, and I do like the dumb frog boss. Bloodborne with Cleric Beast, Father Gascoigne, Amygdala, Vicar Amelia, Ludwig, the doll lady boss, I forget her name, Old Man That Loves His Doll, Orphan of Kaz. Finally, Dark Souls 3 with Vort, the Dancer, Ludex Grundir, Pontiff, Sister Frida, Slave Knight Gale, Lord of Cinder, and the Twin Princes are all fucking blast to fight. So let's talk about my favorite Elden Bling bosses. Now this entire section has some spoilers, but I do encourage those who haven't played the game to listen. But if you really don't want to, here's a timestamp that you can skip to. My favorites, we have Godric, Patches, especially with his fun twist in the fight, both mandatory Morgoth fights, and finally, the best boss, Spirit Snail in the caves. Yeah, that's it. Those ones are the ones that will stick in my mind for having a good boss fight. There are a few others that I won't forget, but it's not because of their fight is good. Like General Radahn, whose fight was hard as balls due to all of his hitboxes being misaligned, which caused a lot of the fight with me scratching my head on how to beat him. Then a patch came out, they fixed the hitboxes while accidentally nerfing the man's damage to the point where he couldn't hurt a fly. I don't know how his fight is now, I just haven't had time to refight him. Since the game has 80-ish bosses, you shouldn't expect all the bosses to be handcrafted for the area, due to the amount of time and effort that the devs would need to do that. In order for them to achieve this, they reused a lot of bosses and even made basic enemy bosses. They simply took a basic enemy and gave him a lot of health. Look at that, we got a new boss and his name is Soldier of Godric. But perhaps some of the worst additions are the use of the repeated bosses and how it can quickly make bosses lose their luster. To start this conversation, let's talk about Elden Ring's own extreme of copying bosses. So we get to talk about dragons and how much FromSoft loves them, and they went overkill. So the ones I have experienced to this point have to be the fire-breathing dragon in Limegrave, the scarlet rot dragon in Caelid, the screaming dragon and its babies in Caelid, the fire-breathing dragon on the bridge in Caelid, the sleeping dragon in the lake area, the lightning dragon in Atlas Plateau, more lightning dragons in a late-game floating area, the two-headed dragon in the floating area, the Lich Death Dragon with the I Hug You lady. I think there are more, as the wiki says that there's over 10 fucking dragons. Like, Jesus Christ, why are there so many? Most of them are the basic bitch dragon with their dragon breath move changed. Other than that, they all fight the same except for 3 dragons with actually different moves. It sucks because if they cut out some of the dragons, it would have been so much better. Like, the first dragon's appearance is amazing and how it happens and how it surprises you. The sleeping dragon in the lake is also neat as it presents 2 options for the item. You need to either kill the dragon or grab the item and run away. With the amount of them and how often they're used, they become not special when discovering a new one. Or the game's second worst offender, the Erdtree avatars, which happened to be a reskin of the Asylum Demon from Dark Souls, which could have been a cute reference like the Stray Demon in Dark Souls 3, but they decided to fuck it up as they threw 8 of these bosses at us throughout the game. Like, calm the fuck down, FromSoft. The repeats even extend to the main bosses. There's a second Godric fight, Mog gets repeated, Morgott is repeated, but this time he's just fucking roaming around. The Godscan men are everywhere, and there's probably more that I haven't even seen. It might not seem to be a problem for some, but for me, it really waters down the experience of a boss fight. To quote another YouTuber, Democracy, which I don't think I'm saying his name right, so I'm just gonna put on the screen. Would bosses like Slave Knight Gale still be fantastic and memorable if you had to fight them multiple times in a single playthrough? With the mass amount of repeats and bosses, it seems that even the scaling and the co-op seems to follow madman logic. There are instances where you can start a fight on your own and see that you're hitting the boss like a truck, so you might as well bring your friends along to dunk on this man, just to find out that his health and his resistances have been fucking tripled to throw you for a loop. Why did he need this much fucking health? Like, Jesus Christ. It doesn't happen often, however, when it does show its bald-ass ugly head, it hits hard. Then the bosses won't stay still, and that's a theme I hope you're ready for, as that's how the bosses are after the second Morgott fight, where they won't stay fucking still. The game's just too excited to show you everything it's made. Every time I decide to look at them, it tends to just be a repeated boss, which is a shame because it really makes the game bloated. The game could have benefited from cutting out things for a better experience. Like, get rid of some of the dragons, there's no need for half of them. Get rid of the repeated main bosses and put more basic enemies so that the bosses can stand on their own. Get rid of the stupid cave in Radon's room. Why is it there? The one thing I typically could have gotten rid of is the entirety of the Mountaintop of Giants, as there isn't much there that's unique. It's filled to the brim with old enemies and has a rather annoying layout. Plus, it holds the Fire Giant, the game's flat-out worst boss for me. Again, as someone who loves co-op in these games, it's really hard to deal with this boss since you need your fucking horse. But after beating the boss, your character takes a nap, then teleports to the next area, making me ask, why is the Mountaintop of Giants even here? They could have done more if they cut the dumbass area. But it leads me to my final comments on Elden Ring as a whole. Elden Ring is a game that really disappoints me since it's a good game bogged down with not having enough while at the same time having too much content. It's hard to describe, but the open world has a lot to explore, but not a lot to do in it. While I see a lot of people talk about how cookie cutter other open world games are, they do it for a reason. Most of the time, it gives the player more XP, other times it's to give the players items and weapons at a better spread out pace. Something Elden Ring could have benefited from versus random items being in odd spots, because why not? It's a game that a lot will say is changing the industry, but bringing it back to how it started this whole thing, it's just FromSoft's cookie-cutter reuse of the Dark Souls formula. All it did was be an open-world game with a little side content, which most of the time leads to some frustrating exploration. This truly is just Dark Souls 4, but instead of the industry and fans getting upset that they're just making the same game over and over again, it's just getting praised for making the same game. I think it's getting praised because they don't squeeze out the same game at an alarming rate like Ubisoft does. The game could have helped itself by cutting out some of the content to make the experience feel less aimless. Or you could have had some side quests, literally anything than just go to Big Tree. That's your only motivation in this aimless world. Now the game's music is also disappointing, as I just don't like the game's boss tracks as much as previous games. But the ambient soundtrack is nice, even if some songs sound like they're from Slay the Spire. In its current state, I would say that Elden Ring is a low 8 or high 7 out of 10. A game that has a lot of flaws that shouldn't be shrugged off and actually talked about so the devs can get some feedback versus the game is perfect. Because when the sequel comes out and it has the same problems, then I hope the community sees the power of actually criticizing a game. So I'm personally not excited for Elden Ring 2 Attack of Solaire. With the Elden Ring review done, I can finally uninstall the game. Plus some quick updates on things for the channel. I know I've been prologuing my backlog, but I'll return to it shortly. In fact, I'm revising the list as we speak, so the link will be in the description. So if you see a game that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. But the next video will be on one more review, this time on a classic PS1 puzzle game. This will be done using the PS Plus Premium Classic emulation of games, which is a fucking mouthful. But the next video should be short since it's Mr. Driller. If you liked the video and want to see more, subscribe. If you hated the video, let me know in the comments since the dislike button does nothing. Until then, I hope everyone has a fantastic day.